Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Let's get to it. Oh, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Codependent Dummy podcast. Today, we are sitting down with Jeremy Treat. Jeremy is a licensed marriage and family therapist in Pasadena, California. He specializes in couples counseling with the Gottman Method. Jeremy helps couples reignite the spark by listening to each other more carefully, understanding each other more deeply, and building new skills to relate to each other in reliably positive ways. Jeremy, thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we'll start with the typical two. I'm curious, Jeremy, in your own words, how do you conceptualize the term codependency?
Well, I guess the best way for me to think about that would be less a binary label. It's less about either being codependent or not being codependent. It's more a continuum. It's more if you sort of picture a number line going off infinitely in both directions of being codependent, and I'm going to get into what I would call interdependent in relationships, because that the research kind of points to that being a much better way to relate to your partner.
Right.
We could sort of plot along that infinite line, one way or the other, how codependent or reliably interdependent is this particular behavior. Am I acting in ways that are more codependent right now, or am I acting in ways that are more fair and balanced and interdependent enough in the context of a loving relationship?
Mm-hmm.
So I like to, with that as a backdrop, I like to think of it as, I look at life as a series of relationships. Life is all about relationships, right? And we think about relationships, especially young folks think about romantic relationships as being kind of the de facto model for a relationship. But you have relationships with anything and everything. You have relationships with your parents, you have relationships with your siblings, with your friends, with your romantic partners.
With but yourself?
That's what yeah, exactly. See, you're tracking with me, and that's great. You must foster a relationship with yourself. You have to foster a relationship with the world at large. This includes your thoughts and your beliefs and how you conceptualize how the world works. In religious or spiritual circles, or in those terms, we might think of having a relationship with ultimate reality, with something bigger than the world, bigger than the day-to-day stuff. So how do I define codependence? This would be kind of the consistent pattern of sacrificing your relationship with yourself in favor of maintaining a more unbalanced relationship with someone else, or a number of other people, because you might sort of have codependent behaviors that kind of cross that whole spectrum of romantic relationships and parental relationships and you name it, friend relationships.
Yes.
So yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, it tends to mean that you sort of focus more on taking care of other people, and it becomes very difficult to clearly define what your own wants and needs might be, and how do you take as good a care of yourself as you're taking care of other people.
Mm-hmm. And along that line of conceptualizing codependency, some thoughts about what the other end of that spectrum, what does interdependency mean to you?
Interdependence. So I work with couples almost exclusively at this point in my career. And it's really great to see a relationship sort of live and in person in the office, right in front of me, because it allows you to sort of get what is real, allows you to get really to kind of get to know people at maybe a deeper level than you do if you're just talking to somebody one-on-one, because you're getting their perspective and the partner's perspective, and you're seeing any relationship should be bigger than the sum of its parts, right? So one individual and one individual make a complete relationship. Half a person, someone who is not really investing in their relationship with themselves, who is really just defining themselves based on how they relate to a partner or to somebody else. Two halves don't make a whole, right? We think about this in popular parlance. You sort of say, oh, my spouse, this is my better half, right? This is built into the way we sort of talk and think about relationships.
You complete me.
There you go. Was that Jerry Maguire?
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah. That was a while ago. Deep cut. Yeah, so it's this sense of how do I maintain myself as an individual as one complete person? And then I've got to go out and find a complete person in the world. Then what we create is bigger than either one of us. It's bigger than both of us. The relationship is something different, something special. And so that's where interdependence comes in, right? There are moments, we are all human. We all make mistakes. We all have our weaknesses and our challenges. And so there are moments where I don't shine in a certain type of environment, in a certain type of situation. I'm having a bad day. Something goes wrong. I had a series of difficult sessions. Something in my personal life comes amiss. I had an argument with somebody that I can't see eye to eye on, perhaps. In those low moments, I have to have a partner who I can rely on. And if I can be clear about, here are my thoughts, here are my feelings, here are my wants, and here are my needs, then they can support me and I can allow them to support me. I don't feel like I can only support them. It doesn't necessarily have to be a one-way street constantly. And so sometimes that's me. I'm the one who needs the help. I'm the one that needs the support. And sometimes that's my partner. Sometimes my partner has a hard day, has an argument with somebody, has something that just goes wrong in life, and they rely on me. And so interdependence is, I have a good solid relationship with myself, and I have a good solid relationship with my partner, and we support each other in those moments that we need to. It's not always me taking care of you or you taking care of me. I don't derive all of my own personal worth and value based on your mood, based on how well you're doing, right? But how well you're doing matters to me. I want to make sure that you're okay, and so I can provide that uncomplicatedly.
Right. So I think I'm hearing even another aspect of this infinite spectrum is codependency, interdependency, and then you can potentially travel towards independence, but it could be so like singular that, yeah, you're like, oh, you're having a bad day. Tough luck. I'm feeling good about myself. Right. So again, it's that
yes,
balance.
Narcissism, I think, is what you're talking about. It's interesting. I hate to use stereotypical language, and I'm gonna live in this space just for a moment, because this can happen either way. And my own story, which I'll be happy to go into in a moment, it is a bit of an exception to this stereotypical rule. But stereotypically speaking, in America, in the West, our young women, generally speaking, are vastly socialized to take care of other people before they take care of themselves, right?
Yeah.
This is why I love your motto. Start living large, take up space in other people's lives. You have to be able to do that, because if you value yourself just as much, then you know that you're worth taking up that space. Our young men, generally speaking, are very often socialized to be strong and independent, and you don't need anybody, and you need to take care of yourself and nobody else, and you can't rely on others. And those are kind of that's a different spectrum. That's kind of a flip-flop spectrum, right? That's something that on one side is very difficult, on the other side is equally difficult. And so I think that's why interdependence kind of plays to the strengths of both of these approaches. Love yourself, love your partner, take care of yourself, take care of your partner. But but do that clearly, do that cleanly, do that in a way that, isn't laden with guilt and self-doubt and these challenges in expressing oneself.
Yes. You mentioned your story, aspects of your story.
Yes.
Can you share about any experiences of codependency?
Yeah. So I came into the world, I think, wired to be codependent based on my experiences, honestly. Again, this is where I feel like, most young men get socialized a certain way. I did not necessarily have that experience because everybody's different, obviously.
Right.
What I find is that early family origin issues often sort of create the road to codependency. It's when parents have really poor boundaries, when they have their own mental health concerns that might be undiagnosed or untreated. Um, I grew up in the early 80s, and so that was kind of a different time. There was still a huge mental health stigma at that time. I think there still is to some degree, but it's getting a little bit looser. Um, so I had a father who left when I was about 3 years old. So fear of abandonment sort of comes built in at that point.
Right.
And I had a single mom who really, really struggled managing her own anxiety. And, she probably felt abandoned by my father who left at a very young age. And so I became the man of the house when I was 3.
Wow.
And that really sort of put me in a position of I had to really take much more careful care of my mom in many aspects than I did of myself. She would be the one who would worry, and I'd be the one saying, "No, it's okay, mom. We'll figure this out. We'll get this done. It's all gonna be all right." And so, really, I had to look at that really carefully as I grew up. I got older. I decided it was time to start going out with friends, start going out and having a life, outside of my home, starting to launch. And there was a lot of guilt laden in that process. It was very much, where are you going? Why are you leaving me? You have to stay here and spend time with me. You have to take care of me. This was all sort of an unspoken thing for the most part. Um, and so, yeah, in my own adult life, it has really been a journey of figuring out. And I've been in a relationship for a very long time, uh, thank God. And she's been really great and really helpful for me in this process of building interdependency instead of,
Right.
me sort of forestalling my own wants and needs and not being able to talk about what I need because I've got to take care of her or somebody else.
I am curious, Jeremy. I do want to get to your specialty, but just touching on your story, your experience with codependency. One thing I've observed in my patients and also listeners is this hope and almost rule that they need to be pretty cured prior to starting a serious relationship. And in your experience, you talked about how you've been able to, and you're cultivating interdependency in your long-term relationship. Do you sense like it's mandatory to, well, why shouldn't it be mandatory to be cured prior to being in a serious relationship?
Well, I got to point back to the sense of sort of how do we define this idea of codependency? Is it a binary thing? Is it either I'm codependent or I'm not? Or is it a full range? Is it there are things that I can do that are more codependent and things that I can do that are a little healthier, that are more interdependent, that are more independent when it needs to be? How well do I prioritize myself as well as I do my partner or others? And so, it's interesting because the medical model sort of leaks its way into mental health so often. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's constructive if we can bring in brain science and research and all that. But what is cured mean? What is that? I'm cured of my codependency. I'll be codependent no more. That's the book title, right?
Right.
It suddenly will be a flip of a switch, and now everything's fine. I'm normal now. Well, I mean, what is normal? If normal is what most people are doing most of the time, there's a lot of codependent behavior in the world. It happens
Right.
a lot. And so, there is a process of examining oneself. There's a process of looking deeply within, of spending some time with yourself, perhaps alone, perhaps with, having a partner be able to sort of give you some space. And having a partner that really helps you identify that area in your life and is
Mm,
willing to listen, willing to hear what you have to say, willing to help you prioritize those needs as well, who's really engaged with you in that. That's all part of moving from a difficult side of a continuum to a more healthy, reasonable side of a continuum. So,
right.
we're all works in progress all the time. I met my wife when I was 17 years old. Uh,
Wow.
so
When you
three
were
decades
launching.
later, I was right squarely in the middle of that launching phase for sure.
Wow.
And so 3 decades later, it's been one hell of a ride, let me tell you. But it has been love and acceptance. It has been being reasonable and listening carefully and being able to sort of have an easy back and forth. Um, and it's not perfect, right? There's no such thing as a perfect person. There's no such thing as a perfect relationship. You're
Right.
always going to have moments where you struggle, personally or in relationships, and that's okay.
Right.
It's just you want to make sure that you are very, very clear about that struggle and what it means to you and how you sort of rely on each other in this interdependent way.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Just so everybody knows, Jeremy and I, we, yeah, you do not need to be cured to, it is a partnership. That, yeah. So finding a partner, a teammate, someone to collaborate with.
Absolutely.
That's key.
Well, and if there is one partner who, if you're struggling with codependency, generally speaking, if you know that this is always a sore subject, this is something that I'm really, really struggling with for a long time, and I'm beginning to sort of have an awareness of what's going on. Awareness is key, right? That's the first step to making changes that you want to make is, oh, I'm aware now that this is maladaptive. This is a problem. This is not something that's serving me well in my relationships in my life. Um, what might happen is if you have someone who kind of jumps from relationship to relationship to relationship, they're brittle, they're really short term. You may have a picker that's off. You may have a picker that sort of leads you in a certain direction. And it's very unfortunate when you get one partner who tends to be more codependent and one partner who tends to be completely independent, on the verge of narcissism, on the verge of I just care about myself and nobody else. Somebody who's aggressive and difficult and who really isn't looking for that kind of partnership. And so,
Mhm.
really, the self awareness piece has to come in to recognize what is it that I'm looking for in the relationship? How do I find somebody who is kind and gentle and who wants to engage in this process with me and who's
Right.
willing to give me the benefit of the doubt and prioritize me the same way that I want to prioritize myself? And so
Mhm.
I always challenge people, if you find that you're going from relationship to relationship to relationship in this sort of temporary, brittle kind of fashion, maybe that's a key to sort of slow it down. Take a look inward for a moment. Spend a little time on yourself and with yourself and figure out, what is it that what is the commonality here? What is it that I'm doing? What is it that I need to change? Because it's always tempting to point the finger at one's partner. And when we talk about my specialty and how I work with couples, very often, I notice that there's a pattern of one partner pointing the finger at the other and saying, "You're bad, you're wrong, you have to change, you got to do all these things." And sometimes codependency plays a key aspect in that
Mhm. Yeah. And there's three pointing back at them.
dynamic. Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm. Okay. So we have talked about the Gottman Method, but not with this much focus, with your expertise. So can we start with what is the Gottman Method and then how it can help someone struggling with codependency?
Sure. So the Gottman Method, founded by John and Julie Gottman, who are incredible. They are, I would say, the ones who have the handle on the best level of research on what it takes to be in a long-term, committed, satisfying relationship. They're the experts in the world today, I would say. And so it's built on this notion that if you're building a relationship, a long-term relationship, it's much like building a house together, right? You start and you lay a foundation, and your foundation really needs to be about friendship, really needs to be about how do you turn towards each other in positive ways? How do you give each other, how do you share fondness and admiration and all the good things that feel really nice about a relationship? And that's what we call the friendship principle. And that is really identifying somebody who really genuinely likes you and cares about you and who you like and care about. And so it's about sort of recognizing that map in your head of what is important to my partner and knowing that my partner knows what is important to me also. And so I have to be clear about that with them. And then sharing your life together, sharing those things together. You think about not a romantic relationship, but think about what it's like to hang out with your best friend. How do you feel about that person? Usually, it's somewhat uncomplicated. Usually, it's they like me and I like them. We have common interests. We know each other really well. And so it's interesting because so many of our romantic relationships are based on physical attraction, are based on, this person caught my eye out in public somewhere, in a club, in a restaurant, in a bar. Online dating is a whole can of worms that I don't even want to get into because it's so difficult, right? And so we base so many of our decisions on how does this person look, when really it needs to be, does this person like me? Do they care about me? And do I care about them? Is this a reciprocal friendship? So that's kind of the foundation that you build your relationship on. The next piece is really figuring out how do we manage conflict when it comes up. And there is always going to be conflict in relationships, right? 100% of the time. And that's a mistake that people make sometimes. They feel like, oh, well, healthy relationships will never have conflict. And there's something to be said for codependency here, right? Someone who is engaging in a lot of codependent behaviors would be sort of afraid of conflict, sort of afraid of the abandonment that might be the logical consequence of too much conflict. If I don't chameleon myself to this person and like all the things that they like, I lose myself completely in order to sort of please them, right? And then if let's say my partner really likes Thai food, just really wants to get Thai food all the time, and I really like Mexican food, but I never get Mexican food because we always go to the Thai restaurant that my partner wants to go to because I don't want to rock the boat, because I don't want to say something that might upset them or might make me feel rejected, right? But that's a conflict. You want Thai, I want Mexican. Okay, we have a conflict here. This is not hopefully not a relationship ending conflict. This is not an earth shattering conflict. It's merely something that we don't see eye to eye on. You like this, I like that. And so how do we engage in the conflict discussion in a constructive way, right? And so that's really kind of the second major principle. The friendship principle, number one, the conflict principle, number two. How do we recognize that conflict can bring us closer together if we engage in a conflict discussion the right way? If you don't like this and I do like this, I need to learn more about your position. I need to hear more about why it is that you like what you like. And hopefully you do me the same courtesy of listening to me when I talk about what it is that I like, what I like to do. So managing conflict. Also, in the Gottman literature, we like to talk a lot about the difference between solvable conflicts and unsolvable conflicts, or perpetual or gridlocked problems. It's really hard for couples to recognize that couples can still thrive, relationships can still thrive in the face of these sort of perpetual conflict, these unsolvable issues, right? It's about how do we dialogue? How do we talk about this back and forth? And the only way that we can do that is if we avoid, I'm sure what you've heard of as the four horsemen. These are the four behaviors that reliably lead us down a very difficult path, things that are not helpful to relationships. If we rely on these things, then we all kind of fall off a cliff. It's just a really difficult situation. If we rely on the antidotes, if we rely on gentle startup, being kind to each other, monitoring our sense of defensiveness, avoiding criticism, fostering that sense of appreciation instead of having contempt for one another, being able to soothe ourselves, our own physiology when we get upset, when we get flooded, instead of stonewalling, which is staying present but turning off emotionally. If we engage in those things, it's very hard to have a constructive conversation about conflict. If we rely on the antidotes, it gets a little easier. So, right, we have good friendship. We know how to manage conflict when it comes up. It doesn't destroy us. And then thirdly would be the bigger picture stuff, the longer term things in life. How do we make our dreams come true? Both of us. Maybe you have dreams. Maybe I have dreams. Maybe they're the same. Maybe they're slightly different. How do you honor mine? And how do I honor yours? Again, interdependence. How do we sort of have influence back and forth to and from each other? And then how do we create a legacy? Something bigger than us. Maybe that's our kids. Maybe that's our business. Maybe that's our charitable work or volunteer work. Maybe it's a church function. Maybe it's, any number of things that give us real meaning and purpose in life. So that's generally kind of walking you up the sound relationship house model that the Gottmans use. But it's being friends, managing conflict, and creating shared meaning. That's what we have to do to create a really sound relationship.
Mm-hmm. And you sprinkled in aspects of codependency in there.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about what is the criticism and defensiveness cycle within the Gottman Method,
mm-hmm.
and how does that relate to codependency?
So it's interesting. When I bring a new couple in, I have them sign up online for what we call the Gottman relationship checkup. And it's sort of a comprehensive list of questionnaires on how well are you getting along with your partner, how well are things going, and it sort of outlines each one of these levels of what we call the sound relationship house, and it gives us a really nice sense of, is it a strength or is it a challenge? Are you engaging in stuff in a relationship, in behaviors that are reliably leading you in the wrong direction, or those that are leading you in the right direction, right? And I think without exception, from all the couples I've ever worked with, the conflict principle always comes up as a challenge, because there are all these kind of erroneous ideas about, well, what does conflict mean? Conflict simply means that we disagree about something. That doesn't mean that we have to hate each other. That doesn't mean that we have to tear each other down. That doesn't mean that I have to attack you because you don't believe the way that I believe, or vice versa, right? And so that's where criticism and defensiveness comes in. That's how it plays a role in conflict. Okay. Criticism is, let's say, I tell my couples this, because this is a real life situation for me, actually. I get home at the end of the day, right? I kick my shoes off in front of the door. I know I shouldn't do it, but man, I'm tired, and the shoes are right there, and I want to kick them off and go sit down for a little bit until I kind of get my second wind, and then I'll go move them, right? The shoes don't belong in front of the door, clearly. My wife, my son are likely to trip on them. I'm likely to kick them out of the way. It's just annoying to see them there all the time. I get it. I understand, right? So my wife could choose to do one of two things. If she sees something that she doesn't like, now we have a conflict, because apparently I like having my shoes in front of the door and she doesn't like that. Mm-hmm. She could criticize me for it. So instead of telling me what it is that she doesn't like and asking for what she needs or asking for what she wants, she could say, "Why are you so lazy? Man, you are the most thoughtless guy I've ever seen in my whole life. You don't even think about the rest of the people that live in this house. You just put your shoes in front of the door all the time. You're just so unthinking and uncaring." She doesn't. Thank God for that, right? But if she did, that would be her criticizing me. That would be blaming something that an unmet need, blaming something that she doesn't like on my personality flaw, on some problem that I have personally, right? That's criticism. Harsh startup is often how difficult conversations start, right? Why are you so this? How come you always? Why don't you ever? You gotta be really careful with those alwayses and nevers, because very few things are always and never true. I can't believe that you, why do you so, it's all this sort of harsh language. And so how am I likely to respond if I'm being criticized? I'm going to put my hands up and I'm going to get defensive, right? I'm going to either say, well, what about you? What about the time that you left your makeup on the counter? I didn't like that. Well, what about the time that you didn't put the cap on the toothpaste the way I like, right? So I counterattack. Or I can whine, or I can be the innocent victim. I can say, why are you so mean to me? Why are you always picking on me? I can't do anything right to please you. right? And so defensiveness, criticism and defensiveness are two sides of a very ugly coin, right? Defensiveness is really just kind of a counter punch. It's just I'm not the jerk, you're the jerk. I'm going to blame you instead. And I use this term sometimes. I call it the criticism and defensiveness carousel.
Carousel.
Yeah. I criticize and then you defend, which is critical to me. And so I defend, and so I criticize, and then you defend, and here we go. We're riding this ugly carousel round and round and round, but where are we actually going?
Right.
We're staying in this ugly place all the time. Criticism and defensiveness. Attack, defend, right? So the number one thing that I usually work on with couples in order to sort of break this cycle is, let's talk about what gentle startup looks like in order to not criticize. So back to my example, and my wife is very good at this, by the way. If I leave the shoes in front of the door, she can simply say, do you mind moving your shoes when you get home? Just put them in the cubby instead. Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. Gentle startup. There's no reason for me to defend myself. I'm not being attacked. It's simply, she's saying, here's how I feel. I feel put off. I feel upset. I feel disrespected in some way, like the home's being disrespected, maybe. About what? About you putting your shoes in the doorway, right there in the doorway, putting something where it doesn't belong in the house. Here's how I feel. Here's what it's about. And you're describing the about, right? You're not criticizing it. You're not judging it harshly. You're not saying, what the hell is this? You're simply saying, here's how I feel and here's what it's about. Right. And then here's the kicker. And this is the one that is very difficult for a lot of people. If you are used to kind of staying in this codependent space, if you're used to staying in a place where it's hard for me to recognize my own wants and my own needs, it's hard for me to speak them out plainly and simply ask for what I want. The third piece is, say what you need positively, right? Don't say what you don't need. I hate it so much when you leave your shoes on that, right? No. Would you please move your shoes from this to that? It looks really messy if you leave them there, right? That's how I feel and what it's about. I would really appreciate it if when you come home, you could just be mindful and put your shoes away. Sure, absolutely. Now I'm getting a clear message. I'm hearing what it is that you want. I'm hearing what it is that you need. Because I care about you as my partner, I'm willing to comply. I'm willing to say, oh yeah, you know what? I was real tired when I got home, but I'm gonna move them right now, no problem. So being able to be very clear about one's own wants and needs really becomes an antidote to criticism, to blaming my partner's personality defects. It's really hard to do when you're not used to it. If you've grown up in a situation where you were disincentivized somehow for talking about your own wants and needs, your own wants and needs didn't matter, or they had much less importance than mom or dad or siblings or whomever, right? It takes a lot of practice. And that's hopeful to me. I always tell people, you have to have the courage to try something new and not be very good at it for a little while. Yeah, you think about when you learn how to ride a bike, think about when you learn how to drive a car, all hyper-focused. I have to maintain really careful focus on this. I'm not really good at it yet. I'm a little nervous about it, and that's okay. And eventually, before you know it, you do it without even thinking about it. It just becomes second nature. And so when we talk about the continuum of codependence to interdependence, the more we practice verbalizing our thoughts, our feelings, our wants, and our needs with each other and accepting of that, the more we're moving from what might potentially be a more codependent position to something a little more healthy, a little more interdependent. And hopefully we have a partner who's willing to engage in that process with us.
Right. Hopefully. Yeah.
Choose wisely.
Choose wisely.
Yeah.
And so you touched on the 4 horsemen. So just to review or refresh: criticism, stonewalling,
defensiveness,
stonewalling, contempt.
Yes, usually it's criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling.
Okay.
And here's how I like to characterize that. Again, criticism is, I'm blaming your personality for something that I don't like. I'm not stating my own wants and needs clearly. criticism, right? Defensiveness, the other side of that coin. I'm defending myself. I'm warding off the attack. No, I'm not a jerk. You're a jerk. Round and round we go. If you take criticism to its logical end point, it breeds contempt, right? Because if I'm only focusing on your character flaws, ideally in a relationship, I treasure you. I talk about how great you are. I share things with you, and it's uncomplicated. If I'm sort of mired in this critical thinking all the time, thinking about what a jerk you are, how bad you are, how thoughtless you are, and I'm not able to sort of talk about it evenly, I'm going to start to hate you. I'm going to start to have contempt for you. I'm going to have to start to think of, you know what? I'm a nice person. I'm a good person. That I'm doing things right. And if I'm used to prioritizing others' needs above my own, I might start getting into a martyrdom scenario where I'm sacrificing everything for this relationship. Can't you see? I always do this and you never do that. And right? I'm beginning to put myself on a pedestal. I'm beginning to think that, you know what? I'm a good person. I'm a right and moral person. I'm neater than you. I'm cleaner than you. I'm smarter than you. I'm nicer than you, right? And I'm putting my partner down. I'm putting them in a one down position all the time. And so what happens when this looks down at this, right? What happens when you're kind of on this position of superiority? You start thinking the person doesn't have value. You just start really having a lot of contempt for them. And the research shows pretty clearly that contempt is the single best predictor of divorce. Wow. If you have contempt for a partner or your partner has contempt for you, it's really, really hard to come back from that. It takes a lot of work.
Right.
Stonewalling. So again, criticism is like kind of the logical endpoint goes off to contempt. Defensiveness pushed to its logical degree really breeds stonewalling. And so stonewalling is, I am roiling inside. I'm burning up. I'm flooded. The $10 term that we use is I have diffuse physiological arousal. Very few people are going to say that out loud. But I'm feeling something horrible inside. I'm seething. I'm so angry. I'm so upset, right? But outside, I turn it all off. And so I just sit there. I cross my arms and I look out the window. And that's when you see partners kind of, tapping the knee. Hey, where are you right now? Don't shut me out. What's going on, right? If I've defended myself and I've defended myself and I've defended myself, I'm exhausted from defending myself. Eventually, I just turn it off. I'm tired of defending myself and it goes nowhere. I'm just not going to give any sort of outward cues that I'm listening. But inside, I'm flooded. I'm roiling. And so really what I have to do is I have to self-soothe. I have to learn how to take a break. I have to learn how to walk away from this very difficult moment. Do some breathing, do some meditative practice, do some mindfulness, take a walk, watch a funny YouTube video, do anything that I have to sort of get my mind out of that so I get my body back down to its regular physiological baseline. And if I can do that, maybe I can come back and we can have a more even sort of a conversation.
Right. And I mean, listening to you, reflecting back at my unhealthier moments in my marriage, and then like toxic interactions during former codependent relationships, friends, partners, sometimes with my parents at times, like, is it safe to argue that codependents tend to take on the more criticism and contempt route while experiencing waves of defensiveness and stonewalling? But yeah, I feel like we tend to pursue, we tend to criticize, we tend to eventually look down at our pitiable partners who are so thoughtless.
Yeah. And this is this sort of lethal trap that people fall into sometimes, right? Because if I can be clear about what I want and what I need, and you should always be clear about your thoughts, your feelings, your wants, and your needs, right? Thoughts happen in my head, my internal monologue. Feelings happen in my body, in my heart. I feel happy, I feel sad, I feel any number of feelings from the feelings wheel. My needs are non-negotiable. I need to get this met. I need food, I need water, I need love and acceptance, I need shelter, I need clothes to wear, right? I need. But your wants are just as important. And so sometimes people can get into the mode of feeling like, well, if it's a need, then maybe I can voice the need because it's absolutely a non-negotiable. But maybe it's just a want. Maybe I just have a want, and that's okay. Now, if I'm pushing my agenda all the time, if I'm bullying my way into getting everything that I want all the time, again, that's a one-sided, difficult kind of a way to engage in a relationship.
Right.
If we're interdependent, then maybe you're interested in listening to my wants in addition to my needs. However, if it's very hard for me to do that, if it's near impossible for me to really talk about how I'm feeling, talk about what I want, talk about what I need, my need still goes unmet, right? So maybe I just start blaming my partner. Maybe I just start criticizing more and more. Maybe if my well-being depends on my partner's well-being primarily, I need to change them. I need to force them to change. I need to change that part of their personality that I don't like because my worth is dependent on where they're at, how they think and feel, and what they do, right? And so contempt is very often a product of my needs are not being met again and again and again and again. And I'm blaming that problem on my partner's personality flaws instead of taking my own responsibility for it and recognizing, you know what? I got to be more clear. I got to be clearer about my thoughts, my feelings, my wants, and my needs. And, I see the secret love test among partners once in a while. Secret love test is it's a good one. It's not a good one. It's an interesting one to watch. It's a very difficult pattern, right? This is if you really loved me, you would just know. You would just be able to figure it out, right? And so somehow it's not as valuable if I speak out my wants and needs. You should just kind of divine them somehow. And I tell couples this all the time. Look, I have a lot of training in this stuff. I've been doing this for a couple decades at this point, almost. Even I can't read your mind. I can take a very educated guess. It's the best I can do. So that's why it's really imperative to spend time with yourself, spend time on yourself, figure out, how am I feeling? What is important to me? What are my wants and needs here? Can I be okay if my partner never changes? My partner's personality, their long-term goals, this is where those kind of unresolvable problems often pop up in relationships, right? It's differences in our personality, differences in our values, differences in our dreams or goals, big picture goals in life. If I've chosen this partner, hopefully there's enough good things in that friendship piece that I talked about earlier, that when it comes down to our differences, it doesn't tear me apart. I'm okay with you being you. And I don't have to predicate my own worth on your ability to change. I don't have to force change on you. I don't have to control you to try to make you different. I can just honor who you are. Hopefully you honor who I am in this nice, easy, interdependent sort of way. So we have appreciation for each other. We care about each other. We talk about our wants and needs evenly without problem. We turn towards each other. We're willing to accept a little bit of influence back and forth. I'm willing to concede a good point when you make one. You're willing to give me a good point when I make one. So ultimately, that's kind of what leads us into something a little more constructive in the long term.
Okay, I want to touch on that, but a thought about this secret love test.
Yes.
I sense that secret love tests are especially difficult to navigate with a codependent partner because at my worst, and even now sometimes, I am so hyper conscientious of other people that I do figure out what they want and I do it. And they're so appreciative and thankful and wow. But it's because I have spent so much time being, again, like hyper conscientious of them while I'm also neglecting to self-reflect on my thoughts, feelings, wants, and needs. Sure. And so I think for codependence, it's so hard to let go of the expectation, well, they should know, because I know. because I've known for years what you've needed and wanted and given it to you. So to A, stop doing that, and B, stop expecting it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and how scary is it if I had spent a lifetime doing this? And I'm always a little worried in the back of my mind that if I become more assertive, if I start taking up a little more space in my partner's brain and in their heart and their life, what if they leave me? What if they're only in this because I take good care of them? What happens then?
Right.
And so, yeah, it could be terrifying, which is why people like us have jobs, right? This is why people come to counselors who specialize in these areas, who can help you sort of disentangle that, hopefully in a way that preserves the relationship and builds up this sense of interdependence, not this sense of me versus you, or this one-sided nature of these kinds of relationships.
Yeah. Yep. That's why we have jobs.
Well, it's again, it's a continuum, right? And so I always like to come back to this: the choices that I make, the behaviors that I engage in, the things that I do, practically speaking, in my relationship, in the world. Am I doing things that are healthy, that are constructive, that are leading me down the right road, leading me to a fulfilling life? Or am I doing things that are self-sabotaging? Am I doing things that are too difficult, doing things that are pushing my partner away in some kind of sense, or keeping them at a distance so that they don't get to know the real me? Right? There are things that are helpful, things that are unhelpful. Recognize those things and do the things that are helpful. That's really how I work. And the research points us to being clear about our communication skills, listening more carefully, talking about our wants and needs. This often becomes kind of an antidote to all of
that. Okay. And you started to address this. So remaining thoughts on how you help your clients accept versus trying to change or control their partners.
The important thing, and a lot of the techniques that I run clients through, is about listening. Listening skills, building up your listening skills is the way to go. And so opening up a space, and oftentimes, a therapy office somewhere like this that is sort of neutral ground, it is safe, this is not our living room. All the hurts and difficulties that we've had in the past and in familiar situations are very, very challenging. It's sort of emotionally charged. This is neutral ground. This is even space. And so build up your listening skills. I like to talk about therapy sometimes as it's a parenthesis inserted into your life, right? You're talking about a sentence, but you can sort of insert this little parenthetical statement that somehow enhances the rest of it, but is not necessarily directly tied to all of it, right? This parenthetical kind of space that is special. It's away from regular time. And so let's not talk about, so many couples are dealing with, I got jobs to do, I got more than one job to do, maybe. The pandemic was very difficult, and now we're all living in the same house constantly and working from home and living at work practically, and we've got kids to manage, and what do we do about childcare, and we've got elder parents sometimes to manage at the same time, other responsibilities. When you're home, when you're in the middle of all of this, you're all caught up in the soup. It's really hard to open up that parenthetical space where we can just come together in a different way. And so oftentimes that's what couples counseling can do. It really leads people into, this is a special time. This is outside of your regular schedule, outside of your day to day. And so this is your time to practice something new, even when it's challenging or scary. And it's nice to know that there's somebody, hopefully, who is looking out for the relationship. So many couples are a little ambivalent about coming into couples counseling because they feel like the therapist is going to side with one or the other. And so it's important in our field to sort of not do that, to be sure that I stand for the relationship here. If either one of you does something that's constructive, I'll say, yes, do more of that. If either one of you does something that's difficult, I'll say, wait, hold on, do less of that. So being able to have that special space where you can come in, it's not the same as the rest of your life. You can practice something new, you can slow down. It's about listening really carefully. It's about summarizing and validating. You can validate even what you don't agree with, because I can validate your position because it's your position. I see why you'd feel that way from where you're standing, even though I don't share that same thought or feeling or belief.
Right.
So opening up that special space to be able to kind of workshop some of this and practice it. Practice
Right.
makes perfect, right? You're not going to be good at driving a car in your first day or week. It's going to take a little bit of time to sort of build up these skills in a way that becomes more natural.
Right. Yeah, going back to your bio, you talked about listening to each other more carefully.
Yeah.
And I think despite especially codependent's effort to listen and mind read and pass all these secret love tests, we have yet to feel heard in most of our relationships. And we really have yet to listen or trust what people are saying. And so, yeah, so listening is so valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How will I know if I don't speak it out plainly and have somebody who's listening, or if I listen to my partner when they're speaking it out plainly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a skill. You got to practice it. You got to build it up, and don't defeat yourself if you're not automatically good at it, right? You've got to. Again, this comes back to, how do I prioritize myself? How do I take good care of myself the way that I'm trying to take good care of everybody else in my life? Compassion is a beautiful thing. And we think of compassion as being outwardly focused. I have compassion for my partner, my parents, my kids, my neighbors, the poor, people who I donate things to, whatever. Have that same compassion for yourself. Turn that inward. And be gentle with yourself when you feel like you've made a mistake. If you've done something wrong, which you have, we all have, you will, unfortunately. Being able to approach oneself with compassion is also something that you can cultivate. There's a really great speaker. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Matthew Ricard, Ricard. He's a Frenchman. He's a scientist. He was trained at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, and he renounced the world and became a Buddhist monk. And he's still a scientist. He's got these great talks on YouTube. He's got books. He's got a book called Happiness. He's considered the world's foremost expert on happiness. And he can actually put you in a brain scanner I forget which machine it is, but he can scan your brain, and he can look at the difference between people who have engaged in sort of mindfulness, mindful brain training, versus those who have not. And it becomes so much easier to have compassion for oneself when you've spent a little bit of time with yourself and you recognize your place kind of in your relationships in the world.
I love it. No, I haven't heard of him. So I'll put a link to Matthew Ricard.
Personal hero of mine. He's a very valuable stuff.
Awesome. All right. Well, we will put links to that in the show notes. Also links to where can people find you?
People can find me at my website. It's just my name, jeremytreat.com. That's the easiest way to locate me online.
Okay. So we will, have links to that and Matthew Ricard. And Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I've had a great deal of fun. It's been great.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. We will see you next week. Hey, girl. It's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster. I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram at therapywithmarissa. Email me, marissa@codependummy.com. Check out codependummy.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy, and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please